So now that you've gotten some practice with sum and difference of cubes, I'm going to review with you quickly how to factor if we have 3 terms or if we have 4 terms, okay? And they're both kind of the same method. Let me clear out my old notes to make room for what's left, okay? Oops. Let's do 4 terms first, okay? If I have 4 terms, then we are going to factor by grouping. Okay, so if I have 2x to the third minus 8x squared and 3x minus 12, I'm going to group my first 2 terms and my last 2 terms and find the GCF of each thing. So the greatest common factor of 2x to the third and 8x squared would be 2x squared. So then I factor out the GCF and see what's left over. 2x to the third divided by 2x squared would be x, and 8x squared divided by 2x squared would just be 4. Okay, then I find the GCF of my second group, 3x minus 12. Well, 3 can go into both 3x and 12, so I'll factor that out first, and then divide by and see what would be left over. 3x divided by 3 is x. Negative 12 divided by 3 is negative 4. So I group my 2 GCFs together, and they make a term, 2x squared plus 3. And then I group my binomial together here, x minus 4 and x minus 4 here. Okay. So let's do the same thing, but with 3 terms. So the way that I make it 4 terms is I say, okay, 2x squared plus 3x minus 5. I'm going to multiply my first coefficient times my last. So 2 times negative 5 would be negative 10. And take my middle term, put that on the bottom. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to equal negative 10 and add to equal 3. Well, those 2 numbers, I find my factors of 10. My factors of 10 are 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. And since 3 is positive, that means my 2 bigger numbers need to be positive and my 2 smaller numbers need to be negative. So my 2 numbers then, of course, would be negative 2 and positive 5. So what I'm doing here is I'm splitting my middle term up into 2 different parts, into 2x and 5x. So I'd rewrite this as 2x squared minus 2x plus 5x minus 5. Okay, and then I can split my groups and find the GCF of each group. So what can go into 2x squared minus 2? Well, 2x can factor out, and that would leave me with x minus 1. And then what can come out of 5x and minus 5? Well, that would be positive 5, and that would leave me with x minus 1. Okay, so then I have my 2 GCFs go together, 2x plus 5, and my 2 leftover factors go together, x minus 1. Okay, so knowing that, let's try a few of these together. Okay, I have 64a to the 4th minus 27a. First thing I want to do is see if I can factor out a GCF. Is there anything that can go into both? Well, right away I notice both of these have a's. So I can factor an a out of here. And that would leave me with 64a to the 3rd minus 27. Well, if I have my cubes memorized, I know that a times a would give me a to the 3rd. And 4 times 4 times 4 gives me 64. So my cube root here of 64a to the 3rd is 4a. And then also the cube root of 27 is 3. So I can follow my difference of cubes rule. I can say, okay, 4a is my a rule, 3 is my b. So I'm going to do 4a minus 3 times 4a squared would be 16a squared, opposite sign, plus a times b, so 4a times 3 would be 12a, and then b squared, 3 times 3 is 9, and then I have to bring my a down because I factored the GCF out of it, okay? So then let's look at my next example. X squared y squared minus 3x squared minus 4y squared plus 12. This has 4 terms, so I'm going to split it right down the middle and factor by grouping. See what can go into both the first term, or the first group, and what can go into the second group. So I'll write in a different color just to make our lives a little bit easier. Okay, so what can go into 3 and x squared y squared minus 3x squared? Well, I can factor an x squared out of both terms. That would leave me with y squared minus 3 left over. And then what can go into negative 4y squared plus 12? Well, my leading coefficient's negative, so I need to factor a negative out of there. And 4 can go into both, which would leave me with y squared minus 3 left over. So then I've got x squared minus 4, my two GCFs, times y squared minus 3. Okay, but I'm not done there, because if you notice, hopefully you notice, x squared minus 4 is a difference of squares. I have the square root of x squared is x, the square root of 4 is 2, so I can rewrite this as x plus 2 times x minus 2, and then y squared minus 3. This is not a difference of cubes because y squared is squared, it's not a cube. Okay, pause, think about that for a second. Okay, let's do just a couple more together and then I'll let you practice some. Okay, these are my notes to myself at the bottom, sorry. If I have 25x to the fourth minus 36, okay, let's see, this is a difference of squares, okay? What's the square root of 25? 5. And the square root of x to the fourth is x squared. And then what's the square root of 36? 6. So I can rewrite this as 5x plus 6 times 5x minus 6. Okay. So then my last one would be a squared b squared minus 8ab squared plus 16b to the fourth. Before I do anything, I want to look at this and say, okay, well, can I factor a GCF out of this? And the answer is yes. I can take a b squared out of the whole thing. Let's go back to so b squared, which would leave me with a squared minus 8ab plus 16b squared is what I would have left over. So then I ask myself, okay, I know there's more than one variable here. We'll deal with variables here in a second, but I'm still, since I've got 3 terms, we're ignoring our b squared, still going to multiply a times c. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to equal 16 and add to equal negative 8. Well, my factors of 16 are 1 and 16, 2 and 8, 4 and 4. So my factors then would be negative 4 and negative 4. So if I split my middle term up, if they have to add to equal AB, that means that the negative 4 and the negative 4 are both going to be ABs. So I'll write this as a squared minus 4AB minus 4AB plus 16B squared. Okay, and now factor by grouping. What can go into a squared and minus 4ab? Well, that would be a, and that would leave me with a minus 4b in my first term. And then I go to my second one. What can go into negative 4ab plus 16b squared? Well, 4 can go into both 4 and 16. And since my first term is negative, I'll factor out a negative. And I have a b in both of my terms, so I'll factor a b out of there as well, which would leave me with a minus 4b. So I'll group my two GCFs together, and I'll have a minus 4b times a minus 4b. And don't forget my GCF that I factored out at the very beginning. That goes in the front as well. Okay, now I can leave it like this, or since I'm multiplying the same thing twice, I can write it out as b squared times a minus 4b squared. Okay, so let's try some delta math practice problems here. I know this is a lot, so I'm not going to give you a ton of practice problems, but this is something that we're going to have to be really good at. So please email me if you have any questions at all.